Hello everybody, and welcome to another Fun Friday. We're continuing our coverage of Dystopian Wars, as Warcradle have kindly sent me actually two separate fleets this time. Well, to be honest, they sent me one and then they sent me the other. I did mean to get the first one, which is the one we're going to see first, up last week, but I had an absolutely splitting headache on the Friday, and so I wasn't able to process the video. So instead you get to see both at once. So the first one we're looking at is what's called the Ning Jing battle fleet, aka the Chinese. And as you can see, they are following a kind of what if the Forbidden City was heavily armed and took to the seas aesthetic. So what do you get in this battle fleet box? Well, as you probably are beginning to guess from the pattern of the Warcradle Dystopian Wars releases, you get a capital ship, some cruisers, and some escorts, and the cruisers and escorts are modular. So what do the sprues look like? Well, this is the escort sprue, and it also comes with a bunch of the weapons for the larger ships. And you can see here there's two escorts present, each in two halves, and then you've got generators running down the left-hand side there, and the rocket turrets and gun turrets down in the middle there. You get two of these sprues for a total of 4 frigates, and you get two of these sprues, which are the cruiser sprues, thus allowing you to build 2 cruisers. Now, as you've seen so far from the Antarctican, German and Russian cruisers, all of the nations have modular cruiser designs. These ones are most similar to the Russian cruisers in terms of their modularity, as in you build a central section and then you have a long or short stern section and a long or short bow section, and you can mix and match those plus the armament in order to create your various kinds of cruiser, whereas for the Antarctican one, there's slightly less variation, and it's more to do with the superstructure change. And with the German or Imperium ones, they are more to do with changing the loadout on that modular rail system. And here's the battleship. Now, the interesting thing about this is that unlike the Russian battleship and the Antarctican battleships that we've come across so far, wherein you can alter the equipment and status of the ship by changing around the gun turrets that are in, or generators that are in their various drop-in module sections, whilst this ship, as you can see, is modular, the modularity of its armament is actually delivered by changing that central section of the hull entirely to quite a different fit, shall we say. So we'll see how that develops as we paint it. So first things first, here's a frigate taken off of its sprue, and you can see it has a little rocket launcher up front. This is pretty darn easy to build. It's 2 halves, with a little bit of deck section in the middle, a bridge and funnel cap to go on top, and the rocket module to go forward. I would recommend that if you are going to paint the entire thing, now granted you don't necessarily have to, because there is a section of it between the funnels which will be hidden from view, so you don't strictly have to paint that, but if you do want to, you can basically put together the entire ship with the exception of that little twin funnel cap and bridge section. That'll allow you access to everything, and then you just stick that on top and the whole ship is done. And here's a page from the instructions that show you exactly what I mean. These instructions, as always, can be viewed online on the Dystopian Wars website. There's a QR code link on the box as well, which will take you there. Because all the instructions are available on PDF, they don't include a physical copy in the box. So it does reduce clutter. I must admit, I wasn't necessarily sure about the idea at first, because I do like to have instructions in front of me. But I do appreciate you not having, piles and piles of instruction manuals lying around afterwards. And, well, let's face it, most of us these days have a phone, tablet, computer screen, etc. that we can have somewhere nearby to reference, or you can use the old school technology of a printer if you really want. But that's the frigate for you. And then you've got the cruiser. So here you can see the central section that you have to assemble. And once again, for those of you who want to paint the entire thing, I would advise constructing it as it shows here, but keeping the two funnels, you can see there on the top left, keeping them separate, painting them, and then attaching them after they've been painted. Everything else can be assembled and painted pretty much as shown here. So you the middle section, and then the bridge tower you can see there on the bottom right. Now, as the instructions note, this is the core component to all the cruisers, so the Jean, Wusong, Meru, and Dao class vessels. And like the Russian vessels, they do have little guiding clips on the fore and aft sections, so you can actually, if you're careful, assemble these in such a way that you can push fit them together and then pull them apart and assemble them into a different form using the different bow and sterns as and when you see fit. But you do have to be a little bit careful with that. You can, if you want, obviously magnetize them, although I found I was just about able to get the push fit to work without the need for magnetization. So here you can see the two bow options for the Jean or I think it's Jean or Wusong class. You have basically just a gun turret bow section, and for the Meru or Dao class you have a much longer bow section that also includes one of these little heavy rocket batteries, which is quite fun. So if you've gone with the short bow option, you can see here the difference between the Jean and the Wusong cruiser and monitor respectively is the stern section, which you can see built there. So with the Jean class cruiser you drop the stern on as well as the bow, and with the Wusong monitor you just put a stern plate across the back, and then you just choose one gun. And for the Dao and Meru class, it's basically the same. Which stern section do you want on there? The Meru there is a heavy cruiser because you only got the two gun mounts plus that rocket launcher, and then the Dao class forms a light cruiser because you have the forward gun mount and the rocket launcher, but nothing at the back. And then finally you have the battleship, which could be built in Ning battleship form or Yangtze battleship form. The Ning battleship is what you might call the gun battery battleship, so that has 3 gun positions, as you can see, which drop in the middle section. They both have these broadside sections, as do the cruisers, and there's the stern gun position as well. So a Ning battleship has 3 gun positions, whereas the Yangtze battleship sacrifices the 2 forward gun positions in exchange for, as you can see, section A there, a monstrous triple gun which faces forwards only. And it's got also that sort of dragon mouth contraption at the front, which to my eyes appears to be some form of flamethrower, or possibly a heavy cannon. So then it comes time to paint them. I was in a little bit of two minds at this point because I couldn't decide quite how to do it. I had a look at some photos of the Forbidden City, and I decided, well, I'm going to give it a go at doing it in something more directly inspired by the Forbidden City. So orange roofs, red walls, a bunch of jade and white down the sort of the intervening bit, and that led to the escort there on the left. I wasn't too happy with it. It looked a little bit too pastely, a little bit too brightly coloured, almost like a child's toy. So I played around with the colours a bit. I substituted an orange for the red on the hull. I made the roofs green and went for a much paler colour and some grey for the guns, paler colour for the funnels and the superstructure generally that isn't the roofs. And it still has that kind of Forbidden City aesthetic, I guess, at least to westernise, I suppose, but it looked somewhat better to me. And there you go. So once again, I decided to paint them using primarily contrast paints with a metallic pink paint pen and a bronze paint pen used, both metallic, for some of the edge highlighting. The pink metallic went on the rocket battery tips and the bronze metallic went on highlighting the roof edges. But I think the results came out pretty well. Looking at this photo, I've realised that my cutting and trimming skills are actually quite appalling, because you can still see the remnants of the sprue on the bow there. I had thought I'd trimmed those relatively well. I guess I need a new pair of side cutters. And so I decided to go with that as my new colour scheme. I assembled one of the cruisers as the Meru configuration, the heavy cruiser, and I assembled the battleship first in the Ning configuration, but I did not glue down the centre section so that I could swap it out. And as you can see there, the Meru is also, as I said, just held together by friction, and it's holding together pretty well. And there's the two escorts there, both in their respective colour schemes. And then I swapped out the battleship modules so you can see what it looks like in the other configuration. I really like the Meru heavy cruiser. It's quite long for a cruiser class vessel in Dystopian Wars, but I do rather like its sleek, elegant shape, so I decided to keep it in that rather than playing around with the other three possible configurations of cruiser. And then, mostly for my own amusement, I decided to take off the top gun turret mount and stick the little roof structure from the Yangtze configuration over onto the Ning, and thus created I guess maybe a battle cruiser, slightly less well-armed version, but personally I like the aesthetics of it, so that's just me. And of course I do own some of the old Spartan Games Chinese stuff, so I went and dug that out and realised that the previous colour scheme had kind of been a hybrid of, Forbidden City Red Wall with some green roofs, although to be fair I did buy these ones pre-painted second-hand rather than paint them myself, so you can forgive the contrasting colour schemes, but I think overall this kind of reinforces the idea that I think I prefer my colour scheme over something that sticks a little bit more closely strictly to what the Forbidden City actually looks like. Now, of course, you can paint them however you like. The artwork that you saw at the beginning does suggest a slightly different configuration with much darker hulls, but I kind of like this one. There's a lot of dark-hulled ships in my various Dystopian Wars collection, so something that's a little bit brighter is a little bit nicer to look at, for me at least. And here you can see the two battleships a little bit closer up. So obviously this is currently in Ning configuration on the right. And again, whilst the aesthetic is somewhat different to the Spartan one, so you would be able to distinctly see the difference if you happen to own both fleets, I'd say this sits probably around the level of the Antarctican vessels. The new Russian ships blend almost seamlessly into the old ones. The new German ones are quite different, as you will have seen in the previous video, although also, as you've seen in the previous video, you can make yourself a hull adapter that kind of brings them a little bit closer up to similarity, whereas the Antarctican ones are kind of very much do look like a version 2.0, a kind of an upgrade, and these pretty much are a similar kind of aesthetic. I could relatively easily see someone deploying both types of models in a single fleet and saying, well, yeah, these are the latest and greatest and newest designs, and these other ones are the slightly older designs, but there's enough commonality that no one's going to sit there and go, hang on, these look like two completely different fleets. As you can see from this overhead shot, you do kind of get roughly the same feel from the two. I was never a massive collector of the Dystopian Wars Chinese faction before it went over to Warcradle, so I'm perhaps less attached to it than some might be, but I generally think that the new ones are something of an improvement. The old ones do have a little bit of a Korean turtle ship vibe going on there with the bows. Not that that's a bad thing, but they do look somewhat cruder than the new ones. So overall, I think this is a definite aesthetic win and improvement for Warcradle. And that brings us on to the second force. This is the Mozhaysky Battlefleet set, I think. So this is the second Battlefleet set that's been released for the Russians. Technically, it's the first standalone one because the other Russian fleet set initially you get in the starter set that comes with the Antarctican vessels as well. And this introduces the carrier to the game, which is quite fun. So let's have a look in this box. Now, because this box was sent well ahead of its release date, and I'm not entirely sure at the time that this video goes up whether it has just been released or is about to be released. It may still be about to be released. Anyway, for whatever reason, I couldn't find the instructions on the website, so I presume they will be up at the time that this box set goes up for sale. But that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it allows me to exercise one of my other little favourite ways of testing out a new set of wargaming pieces, which is, can I assemble it just using the pictures provided with the box? Because that indicates that it's a fairly clear set of pictures on the box, and it also indicates that the ships themselves are fairly intuitive. I'm not a particularly great fan of things that take forever and a day to assemble because you're assembling it link by link, or box art where you just look at it and go, I have no idea, looking at the sprues, how I'm going to get to this. Sometimes big detailed models obviously do require detailed instructions, but these are wargaming pieces. They shouldn't be driving you to frustration just trying to build them. Now, what you can notice here is you get a fleet carrier, which you can see comes in resin. You get 2 cruisers, and it says you can build them as a Katanga, Morosko, or Pravda class vessels. And you get 2 Stoletov Ekranoplans, which I was overjoyed to see, because I do love me some Ekranoplans. And then 4 little SRS tokens, which appear to be tiny little Ekranoplans, which I think are launched from the carriers themselves. And when it comes to the cruisers, which you can see here on the right, it appears that the sort of primary class, if you like, has a pair of gun turret mountings, the fancy new bridge structure, and a little twin torpedo launcher on the front, as well as a massive drill, because, hey, ramming is good. The carrier seems to have 3 as well, and then when you look down, you can see in the smaller section that there's 2 other options. One is basically the same layout of cruiser, except now it doesn't have the drill, so I guess that's going to cost less in points. And you've also got a small carrier option, which is different to the big one. So let's take a look and see how this goes. The carrier comes as a very nice and simple 2-part piece, carrier hull, and the bridge tower that slots on top of it, and quite helpfully has these 2 little flanges on either side which slot in there and there, so you don't have to worry about your bridge tower's exact positioning or where it's supposed to go. It won't go spinning away on you, it sits nicely in place, and you can see it's got the 3 drop-on points there for the torpedo launchers. In terms of sprues, you get 2 identical sprues, and you can see each sprue contains the parts for 1 Ekranoplan, 1 cruiser, which you can build in either configuration, and you can see there's the various little torpedo launcher units there as well, along with rocket battery turrets, and 2 different classes of gun turret. Plus you've also got 2 of the 4 sets of tokens, and they also come with a little bag that has little bases for them as well, so you don't just have to push the little plastic disc around. So here's the sum total components for your carrier once you've detached the little torpedo launchers. And here's everything you need for the Ekranoplan. So you've got 2 hull sides, 2 wings, 1 tail fin, 2 rocket missile torpedo launcher things, 1 little rotating torpedo turret, the bridge command section, which also has, I guess, engines attached to it if it's following anything like the layout of the Soviet-era Ekranoplans, and 1 little shield. There's a bunch of these on the sprue, but the shield goes on the front like it does with some of the other earlier Russian ships from the previous box set. And here's a partly assembled Ekranoplan alongside, again, a partly assembled cruiser. Now, the bridge for the cruiser comes in 2 halves, forms that little tower there. The deck is a single piece with 1 little slot-on unit that just goes in front of where the bridge tower sits. And then you've got the various weapons options, the little torpedo launcher at the front and the 2 gun turrets. The hull, it comes, as I said, with either a drill option or a non-drill bow option. That doesn't change the actual layout of the deck plan at all. It's just a choice for which type of cruiser you want. As the previous Russian set comes with a lot of cruisers with a more conventional bow. I thought I'd just stick this one together, although again you could push fit, but I think I'm just going to build both of these cruisers with the drill head because I like the drill head, and the hull of the cruiser comes in 3 sections, so I would advise, based on my experience thus far, assembling it by doing the back section first, the 2 halves of the back section, then attaching the 2 middle sections to the back sections, as they do actually, thanks to the little lugs that they've got, marry up quite nicely. You get a good idea of how they should go together, and then you can put the bow section on the front and glue the front of the bow section together, and you get, there you go, the lower hull of the cruiser. That actually seems to work very well. It was fairly intuitive. It only took me 10-15 seconds to figure out which way round it was better to assemble it. And in the background there you can see the Ekranoplan in what I would suggest is the painting stage of assembly. The wings, I would note, are here. They actually, while you want to glue on the tailplane, the wings actually slot in nicely and tightly enough and with good enough fit that you don't actually have to glue them in, and that's actually quite nice if you, I guess, if you want to disassemble it and for transport partially, but it saves on glue as well, which is quite always good. And you've got the little 3 weapons sections there sitting separately, and this cockpit and engine section also separate. And the reason I'd keep that separate is because, as you can see, there's a significant tumble home on the hull of the Ekranoplan, which would make getting access to that area for painting quite difficult if you built it with the bridge or cockpit section on top as well. So that would be, these would be my suggested stages at which painting should commence. And as I said, you can build the cruiser with either the the conventional gun cruiser or as a light carrier. So again, I would recommend not only just painting it at this stage, but also keeping it at this stage unless you're absolutely wedded to one model or the other, because this deck form here will slot into the hull, and the hull will support itself perfectly well once the glue's dried, and you can then just pop that off and pop the carrier hull plate on instead, so you retain modularity, which is something I'm really liking about these plastic designs. And so obviously I'm going to paint them in the pre-existing scheme I have for my Russian ships, and I dug out the 3 different types of Russian ship from the previous box set. So you've got the Battleship up there, the other modular cruiser style, and the little escort down there, and put them up against the 3 new types of ship you get. So as you can see, obviously this is internally aesthetically compliant because these are all the new ships, but as you would have seen in the previous video looking at the Russians, they actually match very well into the pre-existing Spartan Russian design aesthetic as well. And there's my completed Ekranoplan. I'm quite proud of it. And once again, the paint set, the paint formula that I used for this is in the previous video that covers the Russians and the Antarcticans. It's a very simple one, and it predates the contrast paint era, so this actually uses discrete paints rather than any specific contrast over base coat, etc. And since it uses Mechanica Standard Grey, you can actually just paint the thing Mechanica Standard Grey without having to prime it. I know a lot of model hobbyists are probably screaming at their screens right now, but I do understand that sometimes, yes, you do need to prime a model, but I'm not one of these people who will prime and or base coat every single model. The Mechanica Standard Grey is a strong enough paint colour that you can just paint it on, and it serves as both primary colour and base coat at the same time for the other colours that you're putting on. And there's a very simple colour scheme. Grey with a blue for some highlighting on the roofs, bronze for the weapons and engines, etc. And then you've got a brown for the decking, where decking is present. It's obviously not present on the Ekranoplan. Basic wash of Nuln Oil, or otherwise known as liquid skill, which makes it look a lot better. And then I dry brush on some rust powder, which I think really makes the difference between a relatively plain looking piece and for this particular scheme, I think makes them look quite nice. And here's the new cruiser configuration with its lovely drill bow and the other cruiser configuration, the more modular one with multiple different options. The new superstructure has this rather wonderful star at the front. There's no word yet, as far as I'm aware, on whether or not this is some kind of beam weapon that projects the glory of Mother Russia onto the enemy, but the artwork possibly suggests it might be. It'd be fun if it was. And then you've got the new carrier there sitting alongside the battleship. And here is the cruiser now in its light carrier configuration, and you can see I've just popped off the deck plan for the cruiser variant, and now it's sitting there quite happily with a drill bow. Now, from what I can make out from the picture on the back, the carrier variant is supposed to have the conventional bow, but honestly, as you can see from here, from a wargaming token perspective, you can't actually see the drill bow, and as long as you're not going to be that guy who goes, oh, well, it's got a drill bow, I want to use it as a drill bow, I really don't think it makes any difference. And with the cruiser still in its carrier configuration, here's a little family photo of the new ships separate to the previous new vessels. And as you can see, the hulls take to the paint scheme, I think, pretty nicely. Just switch the view to slightly lower down so you can see a bit more detail of the bows. And you can see there that this is pretty much the only angle at which you can see that my technically incorrect drill bow on the cruiser variant and how it all appears at a sort of tabletop level. And here's a little close-up of the Ecranoplan. I really do like this one. I mean, I think it's more because I like Ecranoplans to start with, but it is also a very, very nice little model to paint. Now, there was no equivalent to the Ecranoplan model in the old Spartan catalogue, and you've seen how the cruisers match up to the old cruisers, so don't really need to reiterate that point. But for those of you who are worrying, here is the original Spartan Russian carrier on the left and the two new carrier forms on the centre and right. So once again, I think these do sort of fit together pretty well, in my opinion. Very similar aesthetic. Obviously, yes, same paint scheme. I know the one on the left, the old Spartan one, does look like it's a slightly different shade of grey. I can assure you it's not. It's actually the same pot of grey paint. I think it's just purely a factor of age at this point. The paint has changed colour slightly over the years that I've owned it, and you can see actually the light carrier there on the right, actually, for whatever reason, its colour scheme's coming through as a little bit closer to the carrier on the left than the carrier in the middle, despite the fact that I painted both of them at the same time. If anything, I think it may be because on the carrier in the middle, the new carrier, I went slightly lighter with the rust powder than I did on either of the other two, and you can actually see on the torpedo launchers there that their colour is very similar to the other two. So I think I may have to go back over that central carrier's hull with a bit more rust powder. So there you go. That is the Russian Commonwealth Mozhaysky battle group as well. So, as I say, 2 for the price of 1 this time. Thank you very much once again to Warcradle for sending me these box sets and allowing me to bring them to you. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Do you like the new aesthetics? Which ones do you prefer? Do you think that my colour scheme for the Ning battle fleet was any good? And do you have any other suggestions as to how else I might do it? I'm always open to suggestions. I'm not going to strip those ones down because I personally like them, but you know, there's more ships to come, so I might end up painting different ships, different colour schemes, and see how we go. I'm pretty firmly attached to my Russian colour scheme though, so I don't think you're going to persuade me to go on that. And you can see what I mean here, where it looks like glorious Soviet star of Mother Russia is going to come out of these cruisers and bring some liberation to the masses. But the real highlight actually of this box set to me has been the Ecranoplans, but that's a personal thing because as I said before, I do like those. So thanks for tuning in to another Fun Friday, and well, the next Fun Friday will be the long requested tour of Drax Pets. It won't take half an hour, even though they are especially cute, but you know, that's what Fun Fridays are for, a little bit of offbeat stuff when people like it, and of course, yeah, looking at more Dystopian Wars, because hey, I like it, so I will keep reviewing it as long as Warcradle keeps sending me boxes to make and paint. So see you later.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.